Picture this, somewhere in the vast expanse of space, in a crystalline structure that probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP, sits the Galactic Council. You know the type. The kind of cosmic bureaucrats who think they run the universe because they have fancy titles and even fancier meeting rooms. At the head of this illustrious gathering of interstellar know-it-alls sits Vextar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose scales shimmer with the kind of arrogance that can only come from never having been properly humbled. His golden eyes scan the assembled delegates with the smug satisfaction of someone who's never met a problem he couldn't solve with a strongly worded resolution. "Fellow council members," Vextar announces, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that makes you want to roll your eyes so hard they fall out. "Today, we address the curious case of the humans." Beside him, his chief advisor Quillick fidgets nervously. Quillick is what happens when you cross a praying mantis with chronic anxiety disorder. His compound eyes dart around the chamber, as if he's constantly expecting something to go horribly wrong, which, considering what's about to unfold, shows he might be the only one with any sense in this entire cosmic circus. "The humans have reached basic space flight," Vextar continues, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. "Our preliminary observations suggest they may be ready for galactic citizenship. However, as per Protocol 77F4 Alpha, we must conduct a formal assessment of their species' character." A murmur of approval ripples through the chamber. These are beings who've turned bureaucracy into an art form. They have protocols for having protocols. They probably have a committee to discuss the formation of committees. Quillick raises one of his spindly arms. "Honored Vextar, perhaps we should review the humans' historical data more thoroughly? Their cultural files indicate some concerning patterns regarding protective behavior and, well, disproportionate responses to perceived threats." But Vextar waves him off with the casual dismissal of someone who's about to make a spectacular mistake. "Nonsense, Quillick. We've successfully tested 47 species using the standard evaluation protocol. It's foolproof." Oh, if only he knew how spectacularly wrong he was about to be. The standard evaluation protocol, for those keeping score at home, involves staging a minor threat to test a species' problem-solving abilities and social cohesion. Previous tests included things like temporarily disabling a planet's communications grid or creating harmless energy phenomena in their skies. Simple stuff, straightforward. The kind of test that makes sense when you're dealing with reasonable, rational species. But here's where Vextar's cosmic genius really shines. Instead of sticking to the tried-and-true methods, he decides to get creative. "For the human assessment," he declares with the confidence of someone who's never met a helicopter parent, "we shall stage the abduction of one of their offspring, a child, if you will. This will test their protective instincts, their technological response capabilities, and their emotional regulation under stress." The chamber falls silent. Even the usually chatty blob delegation stops their incessant gurgling. Quillet's antennae droop so low, they're practically sweeping the floor. "Sir," Quillick ventures, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you absolutely certain that's wise? The human files specifically mention their unusual attachment to their young, and their tendency toward what they call revenge." Vextar chuckles, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain made of pure condescension. "My dear Quillick, we're talking about a species that still fights with projectile weapons and fossil fuels. What could they possibly do to us?" And there it is, folks. The moment when cosmic arrogance meets human reality. The instant when a supposedly advanced civilization decides to poke the one thing that turns rational human beings into something that makes honey badgers look like pacifist meditation instructors. The motion passes unanimously, because apparently nobody in this enlightened galactic society has ever heard the human phrase, "don't mess with someone's kids." They choose their target with all the careful consideration of people planning a picnic in a minefield. Tommy Rodriguez, age 8, of Middleburg Heights, Ohio. A perfectly normal kid who likes soccer, chicken nuggets, and asking questions that make adults question their life choices. What the Galactic Council doesn't know, what their extensive files somehow failed to mention, is that Tommy Rodriguez is not just any human child. He's the beloved offspring of Maria Rodriguez, a third-grade teacher with the organizational skills of a general and the protective instincts of a mother grizzly bear. And his father, Carlos, happens to be a Marine Corps veteran who considers impossible missions to be Tuesday morning coffee breaks. But hey, what could possibly go wrong with kidnapping the child of two humans who've spent their careers either molding young minds or completing objectives that lesser beings would consider suicide missions? The Galactic Council is about to find out why in the entire known universe, there's only one species stupid enough to look at an apex predator and think, "I bet I could take that thing in a fight." And spoiler alert, it's the same species they just declared war on by touching their kid. Now, let's set the scene. It's a Tuesday evening in Middleburg Heights, Ohio. You know the kind of evening. The sun setting behind those perfectly manicured suburban lawns, and the biggest excitement anyone expects is maybe Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in a tree again. Tommy Rodriguez is in the backyard, doing what 8-year-olds do best, digging holes for absolutely no reason while his mother Maria takes out the trash. It's one of those beautifully mundane moments that makes you appreciate the simple things in life. Too bad the Galactic Council is about to ruin it with their cosmic stupidity. The alien ship descends from the clouds with all the stealth of a shopping mall announcement. Picture a flying saucer, designed by committee, probably built by the lowest bidder, complete with unnecessary chrome details and lights that blink in a pattern that screams, "Look at me, I'm definitely an alien spaceship." Vexstar himself pilots this magnificent piece of galactic engineering because apparently delegation isn't a skill they teach at Cosmic Leadership Academy. Quillick sits beside him, literally wringing his hands and making worried chittering sounds that would be adorable if they weren't about to kidnap a child. "Remember," Vexstar says, adjusting the ship's terrifying presence settings to maximum, "we must appear sufficiently menacing to trigger their species' fear response. The data suggests humans cower when faced with superior technology." The ship's tractor beam activates with a sound like a broken vacuum cleaner having an existential crisis. Tommy looks up from his hole-digging project, and instead of screaming in terror like the aliens expect, he waves. Actually waves. Like he's greeting the neighbors. "Cool," Tommy says, loud enough for the ship's sensors to pick up. "Are you guys here for the science fair? Because mine's about volcanoes, and it's way better than Jessica's stupid butterfly thing." This is not the response Vexstar was expecting. The testing protocol clearly states that human children should exhibit immediate fear reactions followed by calls for parental assistance. Instead, this small human appears to be offering them educational content about geological phenomena. Meanwhile, Maria Rodriguez is wrestling with a garbage bag that's decided to split open at the worst possible moment. Because of course it has. Murphy's Law doesn't take breaks just because aliens decide to visit. She's muttering something in Spanish that would make her own mother blush when she hears Tommy talking to someone. Maria looks up, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe that weird kid from down the street who collects rocks. Instead, she sees a flying saucer hovering over her backyard with her son in its tractor beam. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Galactic Council's extensive research on human behavior apparently missed some key details about maternal protective instincts, because instead of fainting or running away screaming, Maria Rodriguez takes one look at this situation and does what any reasonable suburban mom would do. She drops the garbage bag, pulls out her phone, and speed dials her husband, while simultaneously taking pictures of the license plate. Well, okay, spaceships don't have license plates, but she gets clear shots of the hull markings, because Maria Rodriguez doesn't mess around when it comes to evidence collection. "Ethers. Carlos," she says, her voice carrying that special tone that every married man learns to recognize as "drop everything and listen. Honey, aliens are stealing our kid." There's a pause. Then Carlos's voice comes through the phone, calm as someone ordering coffee. "Are we talking about the good kind of aliens, or the anal probe kind?" "The kind that are currently stealing Tommy with some sort of tractor beam while he explains volcano science to them." Another pause. "Roger that, give me 5 minutes." And that, dear listeners, is the moment when the Galactic Council's carefully planned test began its spectacular transformation into what military historians would later classify as the universe's most embarrassing strategic miscalculation. Because while Vexstar is busy congratulating himself on executing a flawless abduction, and while Tommy is cheerfully describing the difference between shield volcanoes and stratovolcanoes to his confused captors, Maria Rodriguez is already 3 steps into a response plan that would make NATO generals weep with pride. The aliens think they're conducting a simple evaluation. What they've actually done is activate what humans call the MOM network, which is basically the most efficient intelligence and response system ever created by any species, anywhere, ever. Quillick, watching the communication frequencies light up like a Christmas tree, makes a small whimpering sound. "Vexstar, I'm reading massive spikes in their electromagnetic communications. Should this be happening?" Vexstar, still basking in the glow of his own brilliance, waves him off. "Perfectly normal. Primitive species often have excited communications when faced with superior technology. We'll monitor their response for the required evaluation period, then return the offspring with minimal trauma. Simple." "Oh, Vexstar, sweet, doomed Vexstar. If only he knew what Maria Rodriguez was capable of when properly motivated. 2 hours and 14 minutes after Tommy Rodriguez disappeared into what looked like a discount UFO, the situation on Earth had evolved from weird Tuesday evening to militarized neighborhood response that would make SEAL Team 6 take notes. Maria Rodriguez, it turns out, wasn't just any third-grade teacher. She was the kind of teacher who could organize a school fundraiser, coordinate parent-teacher conferences, and plan a field trip to the Natural History Museum, all while maintaining perfect attendance records. In other words, she possessed organizational skills that most governments would kill for. The first call had been to Carlos. The second call was to Tommy's school principal, because heaven forbid her son missed tomorrow's spelling test because of some intergalactic nonsense. The third call was to her sister Elena, who happened to work dispatch for the county sheriff's department. By the fourth call, Maria had activated what sociologists would later study as the Suburban Parent Emergency Network, a communication system so efficient it makes quantum entanglement look like snail mail. Carlos, meanwhile, had made exactly 3 phone calls, one to his old Marine unit commander, one to his buddy Jake who worked at NORAD, and one to his cousin Miguel who, inexplicably, had connections everywhere and could probably get you a meeting with the president if you brought the right kind of tacos. The aliens monitoring Earth's communications watched their screens with growing confusion as something unprecedented began happening. Instead of mass panic, fear, or the primitive religious responses their textbooks predicted, humans were organizing. Within the first hour, the Middleburg Heights Neighborhood Watch Facebook group had 17 posts with detailed descriptions of the spacecraft, complete with photos, video footage, and one surprisingly accurate sketch by Mrs. Patterson, who taught art at the community center. The post had already been shared 437 times. By hour 2, every major news network had dispatched trucks to the Rodriguez household. CNN, Fox News, BBC, even that weird local station that usually only covered high school football games. Maria found herself giving interviews while simultaneously coordinating search efforts and meal prep for the volunteers who were showing up. "So, Mrs. Rodriguez," asked the CNN reporter, a perky blonde who clearly hadn't expected her Tuesday to involve alien abductions, "how are you feeling right now?" Maria looked directly into the camera with the stone-cold composure of someone who dealt with 33rd graders hopped up on birthday cake sugar. "Well, Karen, I'm feeling like whoever took my son is about to discover why you don't mess with a mother who runs the PTA fundraising committee. We raised $43,000 for new playground equipment last year. You think we can't handle some amateurs with a flying saucer?" Meanwhile, up in space, Vexstar was beginning to experience what humans call that sinking feeling. The primitive communication networks he'd expected to see were actually a sophisticated global information grid that had just classified his test as what they called a developing situation. "Quillick," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence, "why are there military aircraft circling below us?" Quillick checked his sensors, his anxiety levels climbing toward what could charitably be called mild panic. "Sir, it appears that approximately 47 different human military installations have achieved target lock on our position. Also, something called NORAD is trying to establish communication with us. And sir, they don't sound friendly." Back on Earth, Jake from NORAD was indeed trying to establish communication, mainly because Carlos had called in a favor that went something like, "Hey, remember that time in Kandahar when I covered your 6? Well, aliens stole my kid, and I'd appreciate it if you could point some of those fancy satellites their way." The beautiful thing about human military networks is that they're designed by people who assume everyone is either incompetent, lying, or actively trying to kill them, so when a credible source calls in with "aliens stole my kid," the response isn't skepticism. The response is, how quickly can we get weapons trained on those coordinates? By the end of hour 2, the situation had escalated to include 3 fighter squadrons, 2 destroyer ships repositioning in the Atlantic, and approximately 14 different government agencies that nobody talks about at parties. The International Space Station had been quietly redirected to get a better view, and every astronomical observatory in North America was suddenly very interested in a particular patch of Ohio airspace. Tommy, blissfully unaware that his kidnapping had triggered what was essentially a planetary defense response, had moved on from volcanoes to explaining why his mom made the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the solar system. The aliens were beginning to suspect that their terrifying abduction scenario might have some flaws in its execution. Vexstar stared at his displays showing hundreds of human military assets converging on their position and began to understand why Quillick had looked so worried. This wasn't going according to any protocol they'd ever written. Back on the alien ship, Tommy Rodriguez had made himself comfortable in what the aliens probably thought was an intimidating holding chamber. To Tommy, it looked like the world's coolest blanket fort, complete with glowing walls and buttons that made neat sounds when you pressed them. "So," Tommy said, swinging his legs from the floating bench they'd provided, "are you guys gonna call my mom soon? Because she gets really cranky when I'm late for dinner. And today's Taco Tuesday. Nobody wants to mess with Taco Tuesday." Vextar exchanged glances with Quillick. In 47 previous species evaluations, the captured subjects had exhibited fear, confusion, or respectful awe. None had ever asked about dinner schedules or threatened them with maternal crankiness. "You young human," Vextar began in what he hoped was an appropriately ominous voice. "You have been selected for evaluation by the Galactic Council. Your species' response to your absence will determine your planet's readiness for—" "Oh, are you like space cops?" Tommy interrupted, because 8-year-olds have no concept of dramatic timing. "That's cool. My mom says cops are helpers. Are you here to help? Because I know where my dad keeps the good snacks if you're hungry." This was not going according to plan. Vextar tried again. "We are superior beings conducting an assessment of human worthiness for galactic citizenship." Tommy considered this with the serious expression kids reserve for truly important questions. "So, you're like space teachers? That's even cooler. My mom's a teacher. She says the most important thing about teaching is not being mean to kids. You're not going to be mean, right? Because that would make you bad teachers, and bad teachers have to talk to the principal." Somewhere in the cosmic distance, you could almost hear the universe laughing. Meanwhile, Quillick was monitoring communications from the Galactic Council, and the news wasn't good. The other species weren't just distancing themselves from the human evaluation, they were actively fleeing the sector. "Sir," Quillick whispered, his voice shaking like autumn leaves in a hurricane, "the Zorblaxian Empire just issued a formal statement declaring neutrality in any human conflicts. The Crystalline Collective has recalled their entire exploration fleet from this quadrant. And sir, the hive mind just sent a message that says, and I quote, 'We told you so.'" Vextar felt something he hadn't experienced since his first day at the Galactic Academy. Genuine fear. "What do you mean, they told us so?" "Apparently, sir, the hive mind tried to warn the Council about human protective behaviors regarding offspring. Their message was filed under irrelevant cultural data and never reviewed." On the communication screen, a priority message appeared from the Galactic Council. Vextar opened it with the enthusiasm of someone expecting their own execution order. "Council Leader Vextar," came the voice of Supreme Chancellor Mordic, who sounded like someone trying very hard not to panic, while absolutely panicking. "We are receiving concerning reports about the human valuation. Multiple species are requesting emergency sessions regarding what they're calling the human incident. Please confirm your status immediately." Through their external sensors, they watched as more human military assets arrived. Fighter jets screamed overhead in formations that looked disturbingly purposeful. Ships appeared on the horizon with what could only be weapons systems. And somehow, most terrifyingly of all, the little blue planet below them was lighting up with communications traffic that made their most advanced networks look like children's toys. Tommy, completely oblivious to the interstellar crisis he'd inadvertently triggered, had found a control panel that made musical beeps. "Hey, space teachers, listen to this song I made up," he announced, pressing buttons in a rhythm that would later be analyzed by xenomusicologists as surprisingly complex. "It's about my dog, Buster. He's really good at catching frisbees, but really bad at not eating my homework." "Sir," Quillick said, his voice now reaching frequencies that would make dolphins jealous, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. It appears the humans have weapons systems we weren't aware of. Several of them appear to be pointed at us." Vextar's scales, which had been shimmering with confidence just hours ago, were now decidedly dull. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reports showed a primitive species barely capable of interplanetary travel." "Sir, I think our intelligence reports may have been incomplete." That was when the communication system crackled to life, with a voice that made both aliens freeze in terror. It wasn't the voice of a military commander or government official. It was worse. It was the voice of an angry mother who'd had enough. "Attention, alien spacecraft," came Maria Rodriguez's voice, somehow patched through every communication system they had. "This is Maria Rodriguez, and you have my son. I'm going to say this once, and I suggest you listen carefully because I've had to explain things to third graders all day, and my patience is running thin." Tommy perked up. "Mom, I'm having the best time. These space teachers have the coolest stuff, and I think I figured out how their music thing works." "Tommy, honey, are you okay? Are they treating you well?" Yeah, Mom, they're really nice. They haven't offered me any snacks yet, but I told them about Taco Tuesday and I think they might be vegetarian. Vextar and Quillick stared at each other. In all their scenarios, in every simulation they'd run, none had included the possibility of a casual family conversation during a first contact situation. Maria's voice continued, and somehow it had gotten even more terrifying. Now, to whoever's in charge up there, I don't know what kind of educational evaluation you think you're conducting, but you're about to learn something very important about human biology. When you threaten our children, we don't get scared, we get organized. And let me tell you something about organized humans. We're the species that looked at the food chain and decided we weren't on it high enough. The communication cut to static, leaving two very worried aliens staring at a human child who was now trying to teach their navigation system to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Quillican made a sound like a deflating balloon. Sir, I think we may have made a significant miscalculation. Vextar, watching the tactical display show what appeared to be half of Earth's military might converging on their position, could only nod in agreement. They'd wanted to test humanity's worthiness for galactic citizenship. Instead, they'd accidentally declared war on the universe's most protective parents. And judging by the growing armada below them, humanity was about to pass their test with flying colors. Unfortunately for the Galactic Council, it wasn't going to be the kind of pass they'd been hoping for. 4 hours after the abduction, the situation had evolved from interstellar incident to what military historians would later classify as the fastest anyone has ever screwed themselves over in recorded galactic history. The alien ship, which had started the day as a proud vessel of galactic authority, was now surrounded by enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. 3 aircraft carriers had somehow appeared in Lake Erie, which was particularly impressive considering Lake Erie was a freshwater lake that definitely hadn't been designed for aircraft carriers. NASA had quietly repositioned 2 orbital weapons platforms that officially didn't exist, and the International Space Station was now bristling with equipment that looked suspiciously like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Tommy, meanwhile, had discovered that the alien food synthesizer could make something remarkably similar to chicken nuggets if you pressed the right combination of buttons. He was currently giving Vextar and Quillick a detailed review of the flavor profile, compared to McDonald's, Burger King, and his mom's homemade version. The texture's pretty good, Tommy said thoughtfully, holding up a nugget that glowed faintly blue, but it needs more salt, and maybe some of those little crispy bits my mom puts on top. Do you guys have ketchup? Everything's better with ketchup. Vextar was having what humans would recognize as a nervous breakdown, if nervous breakdowns involved your scales changing color and random whimpering sounds. Quillick, how many human military assets are currently targeting us? Quillick consulted his instruments with the enthusiasm of someone checking their own execution schedule. Sir, I've stopped counting at 237, but the concerning part isn't the quantity, it's the variety. They appear to have weapons systems from at least 6 different technological paradigms, some of which shouldn't be theoretically possible with their current scientific understanding. What do you mean? Well, sir, they've somehow weaponized their telecommunications satellites, turned their weather monitoring systems into targeting arrays, and I'm getting energy readings from their moon that suggest they've been conducting military operations there for decades. Also, sir, their internet appears to be sentient, and it's very angry about the situation. That last part wasn't technically true, but the sheer volume of human digital communication regarding Tommy's abduction had created patterns that looked disturbingly like artificial intelligence to alien sensors. Reddit alone had generated 14,000 posts about the incident, with detailed tactical analyses, conspiracy theories, and surprisingly accurate speculation about alien psychology. The aliens' translation algorithms were suffering what could charitably be called a complete mental breakdown. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Maria Rodriguez had moved beyond the organizational phase and entered what her friends recognized as Maria's problem-solving mode. This was the same mode that had gotten her son's school a new playground, resolved the great parent-teacher conference scheduling disaster of 2023, and somehow convinced the city council to install speed bumps on their street. She was currently on a conference call that included her husband Carlos, 2 generals she'd never met before today, someone from the State Department who kept apologizing for the unusual circumstances, and her sister Elena, who was somehow coordinating with law enforcement agencies across 17 states. So let me understand this correctly, Maria said, her voice carrying the tone that made 3rd graders confess to stealing cookies before she even asked. These aliens took my son as some kind of test to see if humanity is ready to join their space club? That appears to be the situation, yes ma'am, replied General Morrison. a man who'd faced down terrorists, natural disasters, and congressional budget committees but had never encountered anything quite like an angry suburban mother with a legitimate grievance. And they thought the appropriate way to test our species was by kidnapping a child. So it would seem. Maria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had gotten very soft, which everyone who knew her recognized as a danger sign. General Morrison, in your professional opinion, what would happen if someone kidnapped the child of, say, a grizzly bear? The grizzly bear would tear them apart, ma'am. And what would happen if someone kidnapped the child of a wolf pack? The entire pack would hunt them down relentlessly until they were eliminated, ma'am. Now, General, what do you suppose happens when someone kidnaps the child of the species that domesticated grizzly bears and wolves? There was a pause that could be felt through the phone lines. Ma'am, I think these aliens are about to find out. Up in the ship, Vexstar was discovering that their communication systems were receiving calls from sources they couldn't identify or block. The first call had been from something called the President of the United States, who had politely but firmly suggested they return Tommy immediately or face consequences that would make their ancestors weep. The second call had been from the Queen of England, who had been even more polite and somehow infinitely more terrifying. The third call was from someone who identified himself only as Tommy's soccer coach, and who had apparently coordinated with parents from 17 different youth soccer leagues to express their collective displeasure. Vexstar hadn't understood most of the terminology, but words like playoffs, tournament brackets, and snack rotation schedules had been delivered with the kind of intensity usually reserved for declaring holy wars. Sir, Quillick announced, his voice now reaching frequencies that only dogs and other extremely anxious beings could hear. We're receiving a priority communication from the Galactic Council. Also, the Andromedan Federation wants to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity immediately. The Cosmic Trade Union is offering exclusive business partnerships. And, sir, the hive mind just sent us a message that consists entirely of laughing sounds. Tommy, who had finished his nuggets and was now exploring the ship's entertainment systems, looked up from what appeared to be alien television. Hey, can you guys put on cartoons? This new stuff is boring. Oh, and my mom's gonna want to talk to your manager soon. She always talks to the manager when people mess up. Vexstaff felt his dreams of a successful career in galactic diplomacy crumble into cosmic dust. Somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard the sound of his own reputation being flushed down the universe's largest toilet. The final communication of the hour came from Maria Rodriguez herself, and this time she wasn't alone. The transmission showed her standing in what appeared to be a command center that had been set up in her living room, surrounded by people in military uniforms, diplomatic officials, and what looked like every parent from Tommy's school. "Attention, alien vessel," Maria began, and somehow she managed to look directly into the camera in a way that made both aliens feel like they were being stared at by an angry deity. "This is your final courtesy notice. You have 30 minutes to return my son unharmed with a full apology and an explanation of what educational value you thought this kidnapping was supposed to provide. Failure to comply will result in humanity demonstrating exactly why we're the species that looked at the concept of extinction and decided it was optional." The transmission ended with Maria turning to someone off camera and saying, "Honey, is the orbital laser platform ready? Good. And did someone remember to call Tommy's grandmother? She's going to want to know why dinner might be late." Tommy waved at the screen. "Hi, Mom. Tell Grandma I'm okay and that these guys have the weirdest TV shows. There's one where these purple blobs just argue about taxes for like 3 hours." Vexstar looked at Quellic. Quellic looked at Vexstar. They both looked at Tommy, who had somehow managed to reprogram their entertainment system to show human cartoons, and was now contentedly watching something involving a mouse that appeared to be violating several laws of physics. "Quellic," Vexstar said in a voice that had lost all traces of its former authority, "prepare the surrender protocols." "Sir, we don't have surrender protocols for this situation." "Then make some up, quickly." Because sometimes, in the vast expanse of space, even cosmic bureaucrats have to admit when they've made a mistake. And this mistake was about to become the most expensive lesson in galactic history. 29 minutes and 47 seconds after Maria Rodriguez's final ultimatum, the alien ship descended from the clouds with what could generously be called urgent compliance. Vexstar had activated every surrender beacon they possessed, transmitted formal apologies in 43 different languages, including 3 they'd had to learn from scratch, and somehow managed to locate a universal translator capable of converting "we screwed up" monumentally into concepts that angry human parents could understand. Tommy Rodriguez stepped out of the spacecraft carrying what appeared to be an alien tablet, 3 bottles of some kind of blue drink, and a toy that looked suspiciously like a miniature spaceship. He was grinning from ear to ear and chattering excitedly about his field trip. Mom, Dad, these guys are terrible at being scary, but they're awesome at making chicken nuggets. And look, they gave me this cool game thingy that teaches you about space navigation. I already figured out how to plot a course to Jupiter. Maria Rodriguez stood in her front yard, surrounded by enough military hardware to invade a small country, and hugged her son with the intensity of someone who'd spent the last few hours contemplating various methods of interstellar warfare. Carlos stood beside her, still in tactical gear, looking like he was deciding whether to file a report or start planning a counterattack on the entire galaxy. The alien ship hovered uncertainly about 20 feet off the ground, while Vextar and Quillic attempted what would go down in history as the most pathetic first contact speech ever delivered. "Honored humans," Vextar began, his voice projected through speakers that made him sound like he was talking through a broken radio. "The Galactic Council extends its deepest apologies for this unfortunate misunderstanding. The evaluation protocol was poorly conceived." Poorly conceived. Maria's voice could have cut through steel. "You kidnapped my child to test whether our species deserves to join your little space club. That's not poorly conceived, that's criminally stupid." Tommy looked up from his new alien gadgets. "Mom, they're not criminals. They're just really bad at their jobs. I told them about stranger danger and why you're not supposed to take kids without asking their parents first. I don't think they have parents where they come from, so they didn't know better." Even in the middle of an interstellar incident, Tommy Rodriguez was apparently determined to find the educational value in his own kidnapping. This kid was going to grow up to either rule the world or become the universe's most effective diplomat. Quillic stepped forward, literally trembling with anxiety that was now visible to the naked eye. "We have prepared a formal treaty of compensation for this miscalculation. It includes advanced medical technology, clean energy systems, and educational materials that we hope will demonstrate our sincere regret for this incident." "And?" Carlos's voice carried the tone of someone who was prepared to negotiate terms of surrender from aliens who just realized they'd picked a fight with the wrong species. "And formal diplomatic recognition of Earth as a sovereign world with full galactic citizenship privileges, completely bypassing the usual evaluation process. Also, exclusive trading rights in this sector, advanced offensive technologies, and a promise that no member of the Galactic Council will ever come within 50 light-years of your planet without written permission from your respective governments." "And?" Maria wasn't done yet. Vextar made a sound like a deflating balloon. "And a formal apology to be broadcast to every species in the known galaxy, acknowledging that the Galactic Council grievously underestimated human protective instincts, and that any species wishing to establish contact with humanity should probably bring flowers and chocolate, not kidnapping protocols." Tommy perked up. "Ooh, I like chocolate. Do you guys have alien chocolate? Is it better than Earth chocolate? Because I don't think that's scientifically possible, but I'd be willing to run experiments." The treaty was signed on the Rodriguez family's kitchen table, witnessed by representatives from 17 different government agencies, broadcast live on every news network on Earth, and somehow translated into a format that the family dog could understand, because Tommy insisted that Buster be included in any important family decisions. Within 6 months, Tommy Rodriguez had become the youngest person ever appointed to the newly formed Earth Diplomatic Corps, mainly because he was the only human who'd actually spent quality time with aliens and found them more amusing than threatening. His YouTube channel, Tommy's Space Adventures, became the most popular educational content in the known galaxy, with subscribers including 3 different hive minds, 2 crystalline entities, and something called the Cosmic Blob Collective that nobody really understood but everyone was too polite to ask about. Maria Rodriguez accepted a position as Earth's first interstellar education coordinator, where her primary job was reviewing alien species' first contact protocols to ensure they didn't include any more educational kidnapping scenarios. Her first official act was to establish the Universal Child Safety Standards, which became mandatory reading for every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. Carlos went back to his regular job, because apparently even alien invasions weren't enough to get him to consider early retirement, though he did keep the tactical equipment from the incident, just in case any other cosmic bureaucrats needed a reminder about the importance of asking permission before borrowing people's children. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, underwent what historians would later describe as the most comprehensive reorganization in galactic history. Vextar was demoted to Assistant Undersecretary of Planetary Parking Violations, a position that existed solely to keep him away from any decisions more important than where spaceships were allowed to land. Quillick, surprisingly, was promoted to Senior Advisor for Human Relations, mainly because he was the only one who'd seen the disaster coming and tried to warn everyone. The new Galactic Guidebook First Contact Edition now included an entire chapter titled Species File: Humans Do Not Touch Their Young, which was required reading for every diplomat, explorer, and cosmic bureaucrat in known space. The chapter was 47 pages long and included detailed explanations of concepts like parental protective instincts, escalation protocols, and why humans consider impossible odds to be a personal challenge rather than a deterrent. It also included, at Tommy's suggestion, a helpful appendix on how to make proper grilled cheese sandwiches, because as he put it, if you're going to visit someone's planet, you should at least know how to make good snacks. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other species that had once considered testing humanity's worthiness for galactic citizenship quietly updated their own first contact protocols to include phrases like, bring gifts, ask politely, and, whatever you do, don't mess with their kids. Because if there's one thing the universe learned from the Tommy Rodriguez incident, it's that humans might be a young species, and they might be new to interstellar politics, but they're absolutely, unquestionably, and irrevocably protective of their children. And that, as it turns out, makes them the perfect neighbors for a galaxy that values peace, cooperation, and the kind of people who will move heaven, Earth, and several orbital weapons platforms to make sure their kids get home in time for dinner.